stadiums were shaken by Noddy Holder's voice. He left a legacy etched into rock history, shattered records, and thrilled audiences over his legendary career. But the fairytale aficionados were not prepared for what transpired once the lights went out. The renown was accompanied by unhealed wounds, decisions that would haunt him, and a tragic turn of events that nearly silenced even his legendary roar. Now Noddy Holder is 79 years old. Furthermore, the reality of how he got here is nearly too tragic to accept. Noddy Holder's ascent. One name that usually comes up when discussing British rock heroes is Noddy Holder. His songs, appearance, and voice defined a whole era. The voice of Noddy continues to reverberate from radios every Christmas, and he became the face of glam rock and the sound of the 1970s. However, despite Noddy Holder's incredible ascent to stardom, what transpired following would shock many. Noddy Holder was born in 1946 into a working-class household where money was tight. He wasn't given a significant chance or a family tradition to pursue music. He had to seek it out on his own instead, and it soon became evident that he was born with a talent. Noddy had already founded his first band, the Rockin' Phantoms, by the time he was 13. Noddy had a microphone on stage while the other children were still deciding what they wanted to do. Singing loudly and in a voice that no one could ignore. Noddy had a unique voice even in those early days. It could fill a room and cut right through the cacophony because it was loud, hoarse, and strong. Because of his father's encouragement, Noddy was even permitted to drive his own band and other local artists to performances in the family van. According to reports, Robert Plant was one of those up-and-coming performers before Led Zeppelin. By the time he was in his late teens, Noddy was already making his professional debut. He became a member of the EMI Sign group, Steve Brett and the Mavericks. Although the singles they recorded didn't catch on, Noddy needed this experience. At last, he found himself working with labels at a recording studio, observing the inner workings of the music industry. Joining the band The In-Betweens in 1966 was not his big break. It was a local group at the time, attempting to define itself. But in just a few years, the band would grow into something much more. They formed the band Slade, which would help Noddy Holder become well known. Slade's style was unmissable when they burst onto the British music scene. Slade fully embraced glam rock, which was all about show, glitz, and audacity. The focal point of the extravagant attire, stomping beats, and loud guitars was Noddy's distinctive voice, which had the power to elevate any song to the status of an anthem. His writing was just as distinctive as his voice, though. Together with bassist Jim Lee, Noddy was not only the frontman but also one of the primary songwriters. From Goodbye to Jane to Mama We're All Crazy Now, and of course, Merry Christmas Everyone, they collaborated to write song after hit. The UK saw over 1.1 million copies of just one song, and it has been popular ever since. Noddy's voice returns year after year like clockwork. One of the most well-known Christmas tunes ever, it may be heard blaring through malls, radios, and TV shows. In addition to releasing 15 albums with their original lineup, Slade amassed a lengthy number of successful singles. They were not merely a part of the wave of glam rock. They led it, and their high-energy performances, peculiar song titles, and Noddy's distinctive voice made them iconic of the 1970s. Although her ascent was legendary, Noddy Holder's life after the spotlight faded was not at all what anyone may have imagined. The tale behind the glitz and the commotion was one of hardship, suffering, and heartache that fans never anticipated. The negative aspects of celebrity. By the early 1970s, Noddy Holder had reached the pinnacle of British rock, and Slade was unstoppable. Their songs were events, anthems that people yelled at the top of their voices, not background music. It had been an amazing rise, but no one realized the toll it had taken. Because that kind of achievement, however glamorous on the outside, was incredibly draining on the inside. Being famous wasn't easy for Noddy. Living out of suitcases year after year and continuously recording and performing were the norm in Slade. The strain increased with each location, each level, and with the expectations of every fan. Behind the voice and the glitter, Noddy was a man who never lost sight of his roots, while appearing to be the extravagant frontman that fans loved. He was prevented from spiraling like many rock stars of his period were by this grounding. It didn't shield him from the rigors of unending fame, though. A single moment had the power to drastically alter his life's trajectory. Following Bon Scott's untimely death in 1980, AC/DC required a new lead singer. It would have been a career-defining opportunity to take over as their leader, and they were already on their way to becoming one of the biggest rock bands in the world. It has been stated that Noddy Holder was asked for the position. Noddy had the option to leave Slade and grab the mic for one of the most popular hard rock acts ever, but he chose to stay loyal to Slade and his comrades, who helped him build his career. The choice was shocking to many. However, it demonstrated his unwavering commitment to the people who had supported him. Despite being surrounded by the crazy rock scene lifestyle, Noddy was able to maintain his sense of reality. He avoided the never-ending drug and destruction spiral that engulfed so many of that era's celebrities. Away from the stage, he appreciated humor, routine, and family. He was known for having a voice that could rock arenas. He survived years in a field that devours people because of his ability to maintain composure. However, ultimately the fissures showed through that balance. More than 20 years of Noddy's life had been dedicated to Slade by the early 1990s. Through years of success and hardship, he had fronted the band, written the hits, and toured the world. The tension, after more than 26 years, was evident. The realization that life was passing him by while he was caught up in the cycle of recording and touring came with burnout. Fans were startled when Noddy Holder decided to leave Slade in 1992. It had nothing to do with rage or scandal. Noddy desired some alone time, time with his family, and a break from the never-ending routine that had characterized his adult life. Although leaving the band that had shaped him was difficult, Noddy remained. He changed who he was instead. From rock prominence, he transitioned to radio and television. Audiences saw a different side of him in the late 1990s when he starred in The Grimleys, an ITV comic drama. He portrayed an eccentric music instructor, and it became evident that Noddy was more than just a theatrical actor. Fans were enamored with his genuine acting abilities. Television created new opportunities. Noddy played himself in innumerable performances, consistently adding warmth and humor while demonstrating his ability to laugh at himself. Additionally, he established himself on radio, presenting anecdotes from his musical career. Slade's heyday is reflected, demonstrating his innate talent as an entertainer. Slade was a humorous and endearing media figure who was now familiar to those who may not have grown up with him. Throughout the UK, living rooms adored him for his storytelling, sense of humor, and larger-than-life persona. However, despite the fact that Noddy Holder appeared to transition smoothly into this new phase of life, years of being in the spotlight had already taken their toll. His dreams came true thanks to his fame. But in ways that were only later revealed, it also depleted him. He was impacted by the constant touring, the demands of leading a band at the peak of their game, and the sacrifices he made during the journey. While Noddy was able to sidestep the more sinister rock addictions, he was unable to escape the fact that popularity exhausts individuals. Nevertheless, in true Noddy Holder fashion, he transformed that gloom into something that the general public could still enjoy. He refused to be defined by burnout. Instead, he shifted, remained current, and developed into a person who, even after putting down the microphone, could still make people smile. However, most fans were never able to discover the true cause behind Slade's breakup. Despite the fact that their songs endure eternally as anthems of good times, the band's history was tense and would eventually come to light. The strains inside Slade. Slade appeared to be unstoppable on the surface. They had the fans, the hits, the tours, and the vigor of a band that looked destined to take center stage. However, the reality inside the studios, tour buses, and hotel rooms was far more sinister than the glitzy appearance. The issues would later be brutally honest, as Noddy Holder himself explained. The same poisons that had previously split so many bands apart, he said, were fueling the rift inside Slade. He stated in an interview that there are 5 factors that lead to a band breaking up. Egos are the first, followed by money, alcohol and illegal substances, women, and musical differences in the 5th and 4th places, respectively. It was all 5 in Slade's situation as well. The combination was explosive. And it would eventually catch up to a band that was at the height of their popularity. Slade struggled with more than just temptations and personalities. Direction was another of them. A daring action made by the band in 1975 revealed their true division. They released Slade in Flame, a feature film. Fans expected a cheerful, glitter-filled film, but this one was unexpected. It was neither a comedy nor a fun diversion into the world of glam rock. Rather, it was a grim, brutally realistic examination of the music business, the avarice, the deceit, and the degradation of individuals that resulted from pursuing celebrity. Critics praised it. Unlike other glam stars, Slade weren't cartoonish. They were artists exposing the inner workings of the very device that had raised them. Although the film received positive reviews from reviewers, fans were unsure about its meaning. A story of heartbreak and exploitation wasn't what audiences who were looking for the band's joyful side were prepared for. It hurt their business. The film hurt their popularity and, rather than improving their reputation, hurt them. When asked why the film didn't succeed in a subsequent interview, Noddy said that it wasn't what the public, especially the fans, had anticipated from us at the time. They anticipated a cheerful, jovial, and cheesy film. What they received was a brutal look at the life of a rock band in the music industry. For the fans, it was shocking, in my opinion. However, the project had not initially been supported by all members of the band. It irritated guitarist Dave Hill. He hadn't joined a gloomy movie that presented their reality in the worst possible light. He had joined a band that was famed for its vigor, flamboyance, and extravagant joy. Hill's annoyance with Slade in Flame only made the divisions within the gang worse. It had turned into a battleground for creative direction. While some wanted to keep the formula straightforward and enjoyable, Noddy and bassist Jim Lee were more willing to take artistic chances. Unfortunately, as if tensions weren't already enough, this split would persist long after the movie's arrival. Tragic events left the band with lifelong wounds. Drummer Don Powell was in a terrible vehicle accident in 1973. Powell suffered serious injuries, including long-term brain damage, and his fiancée, Angela Morris, passed away immediately. After being in a coma for weeks, he struggled with memory loss that would follow him for the rest of his life. Powell's injuries had an impact on the entire band, not just on him. During Slade in Flame's filming, it was said that he was so badly ill that he was unable to recall some of his lines. Even in the middle of production, he actually needed to be informed of his identity and location. To keep him steady and help him through the process, the other members had to intervene frequently. Behind the scenes, Slade was supporting one another in ways that most people were unaware of, but to the outer world, they were still a formidable team. As he looked back on those years, Noddy Holder felt both pride and sorrow. Pride because, in spite of everything, the band continued to record and play. But ultimately, these conflicts undermined the band's basis. Slade had been more than just a work, it had been his identity, and it was heartbreaking to watch it gradually fall apart due to ego, tragedy, and arguments. Tensions had escalated during the late 1970s and early 1980s. The band continued to move forward, making sporadic returns and retaining devoted followers, but they lacked the cohesion that had given them such strength in their early years. Even Noddy's voice, which had always been what made Slade unique, was insufficient to muffle the sound of everything tearing them apart. In addition, as the band disbanded, he was dealing with personal issues that would put him in circumstances even more difficult and agonizing than the turmoil of rock and roll and Noddy's romantic drama. Beyond the stage lights, the glitter, and the clamor of the audience, Noddy Holder's private life was just as exciting as his professional one. Celebrity can make relationships more difficult. For someone like Noddy, who traveled, recorded, and performed for the most of his adult life, juggling music, marriage, and family was never simple. There was happiness and heartache in his love life, which showed a different side of him that his admirers seldom saw. Leandra Russell and Noddy were married in 1976. Slade was still well known and frequently made headlines at the time, and Noddy was one of the most well-known rock stars in Britain. He appeared to have it all to the public. A prosperous career, an opulent way of life, and now a spouse at his side. In addition to his life in the band, Noddy took on the roles of husband and father for a spell after they were married and had 2 kids. But the stresses of being in constant demand and the trappings of celebrity eventually got to them. Slade's career was at a crossroads by the early 1980s, and Noddy was exhausted by the never-ending cycle of recording and touring. With that kind of work, it was nearly difficult to balance family life. This led to Noddy and Leandra's divorce in 1984, following 8 years of marriage. This period of his life was challenging not only because of the dissolution of his marriage but also because, in spite of everything else going on around him, he was committed to staying involved in his daughters' lives. Noddy concentrated on re-establishing his life apart from the turmoil of rock and roll over the ensuing years. Slade had moved past its most successful years by the late 1980s, and Noddy was starting to see the future differently. Additionally, it was in 1989 that he met the person who would fundamentally alter his personal life. She was Susan Holder. In contrast to the women Noddy had been surrounded by during Slade's hectic years, Susan was not in the spotlight of the music industry. She was a television producer who also pursued a career in journalism and radio. Since Noddy wasn't enamored with his rock star persona, she was immediately drawn to her independence and ambition. Behind it, she could see the man. The foundation of their relationship, which was more resilient than the turmoil of celebrity, grew steadily. Susan was self-assured, artistic, and brilliant. And as time went on, she established a prosperous career as a writer, presenter, and journalist. She contributed to a number of projects that highlighted her own voice and viewpoint, and she started appearing frequently on BBC Radio Manchester. This connection wasn't the same for Noddy. In this collaboration, each of them contributed their unique interests and skills. Following over 10 years of dating, Noddy and Susan formally announced their relationship. They had recently welcomed a son together before getting married in 2004. He was given the name Django in honor of the renowned jazz guitarist Django Reinhardt. Later on, Susan herself opened up about her experiences living with Noddy Holder. She wrote about their life together as a writer and novelist, giving audiences a unique look into the personal lives of a guy who had seemed bigger than life for decades. She talked about the humor Noddy brought to their relationship, how he accepted fatherhood later in life, and the difficulties of being married to someone who was so readily recognizable. To those outside of Slade, Noddy's booming voice was still associated with rock songs and Christmas playlists. At home, however, he was just a husband and father to Susan and Django. He relished the everyday routines of family life, which had always been difficult to maintain during the height of his celebrity, and he cooked meals, told stories, and cracked jokes. Hearing about Noddy's pleasure personally was consoling to a lot of admirers. They had heard his voice on many recordings, seen his highs and lows in the media, and witnessed him perform live for years. It felt complete to know that he had later in life achieved happiness and security. After decades of glitz, cacophony, and fatigue, he had discovered enduring love and a stable family life. The story of Noddy Holder did not conclude peacefully and simply, despite the happiness this chapter of his life gave. Because after decades of maintaining a stable private life and years of happiness with Susan and Django, Noddy would have to deal with something that no amount of love, loyalty, or renown could protect him from. A devastating turn that would completely shock him, his loved ones, and his supporters. The breaking turn. For many years, Noddy Holder appeared to be unbreakable. Through years of fame, burnout, and personal hardships, he was consistently able to bounce back thanks to his commanding voice, stage presence, and humor. However, his life took a tragic turn in 2018 that no one could have foreseen, and it was the kind of blow that destroyed any sense of rock star invincibility. Regretfully, Noddy's esophageal cancer was discovered. Both the news and the prognosis were heartbreaking. According to the doctors, he only had 6 months to live. For a guy who had encountered every conceivable obstacle in both life and music, this presented a unique challenge. They'd only given me 6 months to live, and I knew I'd start cracking jokes, which perhaps wasn't the best way to handle it, he once said in an interview about how he handled the devastating news. This year, there's no use in getting me a birthday card. It's not my style to take things too seriously. I thought that if my number was up, there was nothing I could do, so I started the chemotherapy. Jokes aside, though, there was heck of a battle ahead. Noddy started treatment in Manchester's Christie Hospital, one of the top cancer treatment facilities in the United Kingdom. He was treated with experimental chemotherapy, which had the potential to extend his life but also came with risks. The negative effects were constant and the experience was exhausting. Noddy's hair fell out. His body, which had formerly been sturdy, had fallen to 8 stone. there was a startling bodily toll. This man, whose voice had previously echoed throughout entire arenas, was now at his lowest, struggling in a hospital room rather than on stage. For him, as well as Susan and their family, who had to see him go through the ordeal, each day was an endurance test. Susan would later admit that they had been really tired during the journey. The worry and never-ending uncertainty of whether each treatment would be successful or not plagued them continuously. Despite that horror, she also made it apparent that Noddy's spirit remained unbroken. They all moved forward because of his mental attitude and capacity to remain upbeat even in the most trying circumstances. For Noddy, survival meant more than just taking medication. His recovery was attributed to his will to remain positive. He was aware that he could manage his thoughts but not the illness. He approached each appointment, session, and failure with the same fortitude that had seen him through decades in the harsh rock music industry. Despite the lengthy and vicious battle, Noddy managed to survive. Despite being given only 6 months to live, the guy bucked the odds. Despite the massive scars and sluggish rehabilitation, he made it through. And Noddy's survival was nothing short of miraculous for his fans, family, and himself. "I've been told that a major factor in my survival was my mental approach," he later stated. "I don't get very down. Susan was the one who helped me maintain my composure and continue as usual. She went to hell and back in private, yet she was constantly by my side, fighting for me and keeping me upbeat." Even though he survived, the truth of what he went through was indisputable, and I'm pleased I had her with me, despite my arrogance. The image of the rock star now coexisted with the reality of vulnerability, disease, and frailty. Everyone who had ever applauded him was reminded that beneath the legend was a person who had been compelled to face death head-on and face it head-on. Noddy's entire life was changed by the encounter. It taught him the necessity of humor and optimism even in the face of overwhelming circumstances, the frailty of life, and the worth of family. Additionally, it demonstrated to his admirers a side of him that was seldom seen, a guy devoid of stage lights who relied solely on his own strength and the affection of those around him. What does it leave him with now, though? What is Noddy Holder's life like now that he has overcome the battle of his life? The response is heartbreaking as well as inspirational. Noddy Holder, age 79. At the age of 79, Noddy Holder is alive, laughing, and carrying the spark that made him unforgettable despite all predictions, dire prognoses, and doubts. However, his current lifestyle differs greatly from the disorder of his glam rock days. The truth is that the disease still haunts his medical records and his family's thoughts, which is why he keeps going to his routine exams. What is important, though, is stability, and Noddy has been able to maintain stability. It feels like a win in and of itself that he is still strong. In 2023, Noddy demonstrated to the world that his voice and spirit had never been quiet. Authenticity brought him back to the stage with pianist Tom Seals. He engaged an audience that understood the significance of that moment through his storytelling and singing. It wasn't just for fun to see Noddy Holder, who was once given 6 months to live, stand and sing once more. It was evidence of fortitude. It is now quieter at home. With his family all around him, Noddy resides in Cheshire. He enjoys the little pleasures that come with fame. Moments spent with his kids, time spent with Susan, and the tranquility that comes from not having to comply with the demands of the spotlight. He continues to share stories with his distinct sense of humor, occasionally appear on radio and television, and volunteer his time for charitable causes. He now, however, does everything on his terms. And then there's his voice, naturally. The voice of Noddy Holder is ingrained in British culture and music history. Every December, his well-known catchphrase, "It's Christmas," reverberates around the nation, blaring from radios, stores, and gatherings. He possesses a voice that transcends bands, eras, and the always shifting trends of the industry. It is ageless, iconic, and readily recognizable even today. Music is only one aspect of what Noddy stands for today. His life is an enduring tale of perseverance, humor at the most trying circumstances, humility following celebrity, and survival during the most difficult times. He serves as a living reminder to his admirers that even legendary people struggle and that perseverance, rather than hit songs or sold-out performances, can often be the greatest accomplishment. With which artist would you most like to see Noddy work? Please leave your responses in the space provided below. If you like this video, please remember to like it, subscribe to our channel for future updates, and click on the next video that appears on your screen.